Welcome to the Makers Studio. It's lovely to have you back with us again. Our amazing lineup today features very special guest artist Naomi Clarke-Mordy. Naomi is an academic and textile art all-rounder with a particular love for English paper piecing. Today, Naomi will focus on her technique for cutting and then sewing together sections of hand-pieced hexagons with a particular emphasis on placement of pieces, colour selection and creating contrast. Also joining us today at the discussion table is quilter and tutor Anita Birtles of Justhands-on.tv. Anita loves recycling and reusing, which has led to her celebrated scrap projects. And with Anita at the table is our regular contributor, Jane Brogan. Jane is a Janome sewing machine technical expert and educator. So let's go meet the makers. So let's meet our experts today, Anita and Jane. Lovely to see you again.
It's lovely to be back here again, thank you.
Nice to see you. And Naomi, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
So what are you going to be demonstrating today?
So I'm going to show how you can turn a paper piece block like this, and I've used hexagons, but you can do it with any shape, and how you would go from a block like this to joining them quilt-as-you-go into one long strip. And then the next step will be turning it into one of the quilts behind me when you join those strips together.
This looks mega complicated, is it?
No.
No, okay, all right. Jane, what are you looking forward to seeing today?
I'm looking forward to seeing how Naomi gets these so precisely joined.
Yes, they're very
Yeah,
precise
very
and
precise,
perfect, aren't
yes,
they? And
yeah.
what about you, Anita?
Well, I love English paper piecing, and finding some new techniques to sort it all is really important to me. And I'm looking forward to Naomi's stuff.
Okay, no pressure at all, but should we go over to the sewing machine and start making?
Let's go.
Great. So here we are at the table with this beautiful sewing machine. Is this setup familiar to you, Naomi?
Yeah, this is the machine I've got at home, so I feel very much at home now.
Fantastic, home from home then. So just remind us once again what you're going to be demonstrating today.
So I'm going to show how you can turn a block made out of paper pieces into a much bigger quilt by joining them quilt-as-you-go.
Okay, lovely. And we're going to be chatting about how you got into this as well as you're demonstrating, so no pressure again.
Okay.
So where do we start then?
So you would typically hand piece all of this, and what I really love about that is that can be done on the sofa. And then to take it to the next level for joining it quilt-as-you-go, you're going to want to remove all the paper pieces and then we're going to trim it. So I've got one that I have already trimmed.
See, that's the bit I'm really interested to find out about, removing the paper pieces, because I was thinking they might stay there forever.
Well, historically, they did keep the paper pieces in because they wouldn't have had the wadding that we have now. So for them, that was like another layer of warmth in the way that we would use wadding. But nowadays, we would take these paper pieces out because obviously if you want to wash your quilt, you don't want the paper to stay in it. So I thread-based mine, so I would remove all the thread and then take the piece out, and they just slip out really easily.
Is it really satisfying?
Yeah,
removing?
yeah,
I bet
yeah,
it is.
yeah.
I bet it is.
Just popping it all out. And then when it comes to doing the backing and the wadding, I actually, to make sure that they're going to be the same size, I will put this with the paper pieces taken out on top of the wadding and the backing and then square it all off. So for this, I would just trim it. So I'm cutting off the top triangles of the piece, but you want to make sure you're not actually cutting through your stitching because that's when it will start to come undone.
Okay.
Which, when it's removed, this is the quilt sandwich that I've done. So I've got the backing, I've got the wadding in the middle, and I've got my trimmed down hexagon, so it's a nice square or flat-sided shape. You could thread baste this, or you could pin it, or you could glue baste it, but what I've used are these binding clips, and there's a reason why I like that, because I find them much easier to remove as you're joining the pieces together.
Okay, so are these things that you would normally have in your kit box?
Yeah, so quite often people use these when you're joining your binding. So I use them a lot as well when actually basting the paper pieces to hold the template into place. So they're really multifunctional.
Fantastic.
Really good to have. So I would do that, and you would have several of them. So you would have, say, two pieces like this. And with quilt-as-you-go, you would normally quilt the piece as it is and then join them, but I do it slightly differently. So because I want my edges to match up, so I want the edges of these hexagons to line up directly with the edges of the hexagons above it. So that's why I'm not going to quilt it, because I want the bit of wiggle room before I start stitching it.
Okay. We like wiggle room.
We love wiggle room. You can't go wrong with a little bit of wiggle room.
There you go. Thumbs up from the table over there for wiggle room. Naomi, how did you get into sewing?
I've been sewing since I was 8. I've still got the first cross stitch that I did, which I very proudly labelled Naomi aged 8 cross stitch pansy it was on a card. My mum just taught me everything I know about crafting, whether it's knitting or sewing or painting or just drawing, everything. So it's just as much a part of my day as brushing my hair or doing my teeth.
So you were lucky to have your mum, your inspiration, who got you into all of this. And I was thinking about this the other day about, you know, we've lost that, haven't we? You know, mums aren't teaching their children how to sew, or grannies, people don't live close by to their family anymore. So who is it? Who are the teachers, you know, teaching children how to do this?
Yeah, you know, it's really hard. I think you go back 50 years and it was a part of the school curriculum. And I know nowadays you can do GCSE textiles or A-level textiles, but it's not as much a part of everyday life. But I learned so much from online. So I feel like Mum sort of set me on the road.
Yes.
And then I've just learned so much from online.
Yeah. So she started she started the flame, and then you've just taken it to another level.
Yeah, definitely.
That's fantastic. So back to your demonstration.
Yeah.
What's the first thing we need to do then?
So to join these pieces together, you want to put them so they are right sides together. So that means the front side of the fabric is facing the front side of the other fabric. And this is where I like to use the clips instead of the pins. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to line up each edge and then clip it into place so I know those points are going to meet. And I'm going to be really careful and just make sure that I'm lining up so I can see that it's really lining up, the seams are really matching, and then I can clip it into place. And I find that much easier to remove as I'm stitching than a pin. And if you quilt as you go, then sometimes you can't line them up as precisely as this.
So can I just ask, when you're clipping it, do you clip the seams together where you're matching them?
Yeah, so I want one line of this hexagon panel to match up with the line of the other hexagon panel. So I'm going to slowly peel it down so it's on top of each other, and then I clip it up directly onto that seam. So the seams are just going to flow from one block to the next.
Oh, so it's really good at matching the seams.
Yeah, yeah. It's very similar to how we do it with standard piecing, isn't it? Where we'd nest the seams, we press them opposite directions, then they nest together so they match perfectly.
Is perfection important to you?
I'm probably my worst critic, so I work really hard to get my points matching, but I also think that's on me, and nobody else is going to know. If my seams aren't matching perfectly, your eyes are going to be drawn to the quilt as a whole, not to those precise things. So I think it's always nice to aim for it, but if it doesn't happen, then it's still your work and it's still really important and matters.
Yeah.
So once it's all clipped, you're then going to lay a strip of fabric along. Found it. You're going to lay a strip of fabric along the back. So this is going to be your joining strip. So I have cut this to 2.5 inch wide, and that's the same as a binding strip. So I first learned quilt-as-you-go from Carolyn Forster, and she uses a slightly narrower strips, and I quite like using up the offcuts of binding. So, you know, when you finish binding a quilt, you would have lots of small bits of fabric that's that width. So it's a really good way for sort of using up what you've got at home.
I love your backing fabric, by the way.
Thank you.
It's fantastic colours, and all of your colours as well. They're so bright.
Thank you. More is more.
Yeah.
So you lay it up so the open bit, so you fold it and press it, and then the open bit of the fabric is what you're lining up against this edge that you've just clipped into place.
So that's on the outside, the open bit?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then I'm going to go through and stitch it. So on this machine, I've used the AccuFeed foot. and I'm just engaging that. So this is like a walking foot for doing the quilting, but I'm using a 1/4 inch seam, and that's what I want to use to kind of join the strips together.
Can I just ask you what needles you prefer for quilting?
Yeah, so it took me a while to get to this, but I'm using the purple tip needle, which is just, it was a game changer for me. I really struggled with how thick the pieces were, especially with paper piecing, because you've got the extra seam allowance. And once I used the purple tip needle, it was like a completely new world had opened up for me. And it was
they are
amazing.
fabulous needles, yes.
Yeah. So using the 1/4 inch foot just means that I can really easily line it up and make sure that I'm stitching 1/4 inch all the way along. And then I'll just remove the clips as I go, and I'm just going to sew all the way along to join it into place.
And what sort of thread are you using there, Naomi?
So I'm using an Orifil variegated thread, because that's what I'll use for the quilting as well, and it's just less of a changeover then. But you can use any sort of thread that you've got to hand, anything that works for you. You know, people tend to have their preference, and I think if it works for you, then that's what you keep going with.
You've talked about the colours that you like to use. What's your inspiration then when you sit down to sew?
Probably my mood, to be honest. I think my mood influences a lot of the colours that I take. You know, life has been so difficult for everybody over the past few years, and you know, everyone's come through such a difficult time. And I think that sort of made me gravitate towards bright colours, because I think the colours have a real potential to kind of lift and impact how you feel. So for me, the brighter the better.
Yeah, I mean, reading this, if this is your personality, I'd say you're a very happy person, very bright and bubbly. But yeah, I mean, how lovely to have a piece of artwork that makes you feel something and makes you feel happy when you look at it.
Yeah, definitely. So once that's all stitched, that's in place with your 1/4 inch seam. And then you can either, this is up to you how you want to do, so you can then press it with an iron, pin it and stitch it shut, which if you've used a matching fabric, the seam then sort of just blends in, you just can't see it. So you would stitch it, hand stitch it shut in the same way you would do binding, so slip stitch. Or the other way you can do it, which is what I've done on this piece, is I've then continued to join the pieces, so it's one long piece, and then you just quilt it as a whole. And that's where I really like doing the straight line quilting, because I haven't had to pin any of these seams shut. These are all, you can see these are all still open seams here. And then in an evening, once I finished on the machine for the day, I can then hand stitch it all shut. So for me, it's about maximising the machine time and then maximising the sofa hand sewing time and sort of making it work for you in that way. So by using the clips, when you join them together, this is when your seams will all match up like this. And you can just go ahead and quilt them as you are, and then when it comes to joining the rows together, in exactly the same way you join the two smaller pieces, you would join the rows in that same long way. So I would clip it all the way along, one long binding strip essentially, and then you're off.
That's fantastic. It's absolute perfection. I know that you're studying at the moment at the University of Bristol, and this is a whole another level of sewing and educating as well. So what sort of things do you research?
So I'm doing a PhD at the University of Bristol, and my research is looking at the role of crafting during the pandemic, which has just been incredible, you know, to bear witness to what are typically the quieter stories of the pandemic, you know, those home stories and how people used craft and creativity and were genius in how they kind of sourced materials, and kind of those home stories of what was a really traumatic time for thousands, millions of people.
And did you find out why people did a lot more crafting? I mean, obviously we all had a bit more time, didn't we? But why did people want to get crafty during the pandemic?
I wish it was one answer. There was such a multitude of reasons. Some people, it was a way to process and make sense of what was going on in the world at that time. You know, we had to renegotiate everything, our relationship with time, our relationship with home, our relationship with self. And so craft was a way to try and to process that and to make sense and to kind of think it all through. Some people used it to express their anger at the government. Some people used it to send love to family members when they couldn't actually be there. I made a cushion for my fiance because we weren't living together at the time. I made a cushion for him out of his favourite fabrics. I sprayed it with my perfume and then left it at the end of the gate so that he could go and get it. But, you know, there were so many stories like that. You know, people used it to make sense. And for others, it was a way of connecting with their children, a way to pass the time, you know, a whole
Yes.
multitude of reasons.
How interesting. Were you more creative during the pandemic?
I was still working, unfortunately. So, yeah, we were home-based, but yeah, we were very, very busy. But the craft industry was such a help to so many people during that time. It really was.
About you, Anita?
I think the mindfulness of the crafting was really important to me during the pandemic, because I just found that I was able to switch off from everything that was going on and concentrate on being creative. And you could create absolutely anything. The only problem was if you couldn't get hold of the resources, but that meant you use different resources. It was, the mindfulness really was important to me.
And use what you could get hold of, you know, the duvet covers, the sheets, details, everything was used,
But that's how it was historically. You look back at the women's voluntary service during World War II, and you had to be clever.
You had to be very inventive.
Yeah, and resourceful in how you did it. So, you know, it's not a new skill now, but it's something that isn't given the credit that I think it deserves.
So Naomi, back to your demonstration. So what next?
So you would just keep on going and keep joining that. So you can either hand stitch that shut or you can just go ahead and quilt it. So if I were going to quilt this, I would then take the 1/4 inch foot off, but leave the AccuFeed on and put the normal foot back on. And I haven't hand stitched this shut yet, but this is why I like to, although it's called quilt-as-you-go, I like to quilt it as a long strip because you can do one long line of quilting which will hide your joining seams when they come together.
Do you find the machine helps you being such a large machine?
Yeah.
You get so much more through, can't you?
Yeah, and it can handle also how thick these fabrics can get, you know, because it does get really thick, and especially on that join where you've got the seam allowance of the paper pieces,
Everything,
as well as the wadding, 2 lots of wadding, 2 lots of backing, and the binding strip.
Just go, say the AccuFeed foot will just go straight through it.
So once this seam's on, you would then just trim it off, and again, I'm not being too precise because I'll trim it all off afterwards. And then, like I said, you can either, you want to give it an iron to make sure that it's holding it flat, and then you can go ahead and do the straight line quilting. And, you know, if you want to do more detailed quilting or free motion quilting, then this machine, you know, it's got so much space that it's made up for it.
It's huge, isn't it?
Yeah.
What a lovely big
Massive.
table.
But I really like to do the straight line quilting on it. So I've put a different foot on, and I'm just gonna go down, and I like doing lots and lots of just straight lines all the way down, and it'll hold this seam shut until an evening, when I'll then hand stitch it shut in an evening.
When you're sitting on your sofa,
Yeah.
in front of the telly,
Good box set on.
cats on your lap.
Yeah.
We were talking earlier about who teaches the younger generation nowadays about sewing, and I know that you're really keen to pass on your skills to other people.
Yeah, but I also learn a lot from a lot of people. I think so many people learn things now from social media, and say social media is bad is like saying food is bad. It depends what you eat and how you eat it and when you eat it, and it's the same for social media. You know, it's not all bad. There can be a really positive side to it. Just if you've decided not to hand stitch that shut and you've just pressed it, you just want to make sure that when you're quilting over it, so it'll hold that seam shut until you hand stitch it into place.
So just worth just pausing and flipping it over.
And just making sure that it's lying nice and flatly, nice and flat. And you can see there that the machine didn't even bulk when it went through all those layers. It
didn't flinch, did it? It was just like, come on.
Yeah, what else have you got for me?
So yeah, I mean, you're really active on online, on social media, and there's a huge community out there of sewers and quilters and makers.
Yeah, and I think for me personally, it's how I say it's always how I found my tribe. which is, you know, what I think it's like. A lot of people can't necessarily go to the standard face-to-face groups. You know, people might be carers, or they might be parents, or they might work irregular hours, or they might have a disability that just means they can't go to a standard face-to-face meeting. And so for me, that's when social media has really come into its own. You know, and you can find your group on there, and you can learn so much, and you can share your tips, and you can share your love of fabrics and colours and stitches and everything.
It's so accessible, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
Can I just ask about, you've shown us a different quilt-as-you-go method. The one that I would generally have used and generally sort of show is where you're using a sashing method between the both. What sort of changed how you use that? You know what I mean by a sashing method.
Yeah, so this was the first hexagon quilt that I did actually, quilt as you go. So it was the same way as before. I squared the blocks up and I joined it almost like the sashing that I used on the back, you use on the front. So everything is machine done then. And I liked it. But I also felt that these strips sort of broke up the flow of the hexagons.
Yeah, they definitely do break it up, and it doesn't feel quite like a smooth, soft quilt, does it?
Yeah. I have so many hexagon quilt tops at home that are unfinished because I don't have the energy to crawl around the floor and basting and smoothing and doing it, and the quilt would handle it. I just don't think I could. So, you know, to find a way that I can do it and keep that the flow of the hexagons as one whole piece.
That all overlook.
Yeah, and it's nice to combine hand and machine sewing as well, isn't it? So you've got options then. And if you can't sew all the time, you can take paper piecing with you on to train, to work, everywhere.
Yeah, and I think it's about having a toolbox of lots of different methods. So, you know, this has got its place, but so does this other quilt-as-you-go method. So it's about having a toolbox of lots of different methods so that when you start a new project, you can pick out the tool that will go with that project and kind of what's in your armoury.
Naomi, how many hours do you think you dedicate to your craft every week?
I don't know. Probably easily 5 hours a day, because I know for me, I have to calm down by using my hands to sew, you know, and I will pick a project depending on where my head is at. You know, sometimes if it feels like there's lots going on and I don't want to think, this is when I'll go for the machine, because I just want to power through a machine and not have to think. Yeah, I want the speed, I want something to build up so I can quickly see that I have achieved something and so it's grown.
That quick fix satisfaction.
Yeah.
And you just want to sew.
Yeah.
You just want to sew, but you haven't really got anything really in mind, but you just want to sew.
Yeah,
I get that.
And then there'll be other times when I will do, so one of the quilts on the table is made out of 1-inch hexagons. I think that took me about 4 years to make, because it has about 1,300 1-inch hexagons on it. So it was one that I very much picked up and put down, and took it to London with me, or took it to my mum's, and you know, it was a portable project, but it wasn't a quick project.
Do you have multiple projects on at the same time?
Yeah. And I'm a massive advocate for having lots of different projects.
Why is that?
There's a lady called Betsan Corkhill who does a lot of knitting work, and she does knitting for pain management and well-being. And she says that she encourages you to choose a knitting project depending on where your mind is at. So if your thoughts are ruminating a lot, then she encourages you to choose a project that's demanding enough that you have to concentrate on it, but not so demanding that you feel you just want to give up and cry. And I think the same is true for patchwork. You know, I hear quite often that people say, oh, I should finish this project before I start another one, or I shouldn't buy another fat quarter until I've used up this fat quarter. And I just think life is too hard. Yeah, buy the fat quarter, buy the thread.
Wrong sometimes. They're not listening, and I'm hearing this with you, the way that you speak. You have to listen to your mood before you approach a project. Yeah. Because what's the point of going into something where you're going to feel defeated if you don't accomplish it?
And it defeats the point of it being a hobby.
Yeah.
It's, you know,
and
it's
fun.
not. Yeah, it's not work. So it's not a case of you have to finish your latest team project management thing before you start your next one. This is a hobby. This is what you're choosing to do.
Yes.
So enjoy it. So if your heart goes, oh, the latest Tula Pink collection's in, so I want to go grab it. Yeah, go for it.
So listen to your heart. Yeah, brilliant, fantastic. Naomi, thank you so much for demonstrating. That was so interesting to watch how you work. We're going to go back over to the discussion table with our experts, and you're going to show me how to unpick those pieces of paper as well.
Yeah.
All right?
Yeah.
We've rejoined our experts at the discussion table. Anita, what did you think of the demonstration?
I thought it was absolutely wonderful the way that the join together was you didn't see it. They were really well joined together. The points matched and all of that. But I also thought that using the fabric that you're going to use depending on your mood, so the project depending on your mood, that was such a great idea. You've got that sort of wonderful thing where people say they have to finish their projects, but actually the idea that this is the project for today that I feel like working on, but actually tomorrow I may feel in a different mood and I can work on another project.
That was a revelation, wasn't
Yeah,
it?
and it's given me this it's okay to have several different projects on the go.
Yeah, what about you, Jane?
It's just nice. I mean, I am not a hand sewer at all. And we were just discussing and saying I would join them on the machine for the same effect in the end. But it's just looking at the range of colours. I mean, you're drawn to bright colours, obviously, mostly, aren't you? Do you have any sort of plan when you start sewing them together, or it's just whatever comes to hand?
Again, it really depends on where my mood is at. Yeah. So I knew with the Dresdens, I just knew I wanted to do something Matula and alternate between different colourways. And sometimes a new collection might come out, and I quite like using a dark colour in combination with bright colours, because to me it then makes those colours pop. So whether it's a really dark binding that will then make all the hexagons pop, or anything, just creating that contrast.
So you always paper piece your quilts, do you?
Not all of them. Again, it depends. If I want a quick make, then I will just power through. Through the machine. But for me, hand piecing is really where my love lies, because it's just what I've been doing since I was 8. So it's that combination of hand piecing and the fastness of a machine that means I can finish the quilts that previously I wasn't finishing.
Yeah.
We talked at the start of your demonstration about removing the paper, and you're just going to demonstrate really quickly how you do that and how satisfying it is as well.
Yeah. So when you remove the pieces, obviously if it's a whole quilt, it can be really tiring removing all the pieces. So once something is secured all the way around it, you can then take the paper piece out. So for the squares at the centre of this, once they're sewn into place, you can then take the paper piece out. I quite like to thread based, again, because that's something I can do when I'm sat on the sofa. And for me, it's quite like muscle memory. So my mum can knit without looking, and I can thread based without looking. So for me, it's muscle memory. And I won't use a knot on the back either. So everything's done from the back for me. And I literally just go round, because I haven't knotted it, and I'm just gradually pulling it out. Then the threads come out, and I will keep that away from the cat. Sometimes I'll reuse it. If it's a really big hexagon like this, I might reuse the thread for doing a smaller hexagon. And then you can just lift the seam allowance up and just pull the template out like this. And then again, you can reuse these. So that's really great. Some people do a little hole punch right in the centre if you want to. If that, sometimes grip can be slightly harder, so you can use a little crochet hook and just pop it out. Then if there's a little hole,
it's great that you can reuse them, so you haven't got to keep either cutting or buying new templates.
It's like having the foils removed when you're having your hair highlighted, isn't it?
It's sort of satisfying,
very
isn't it?
satisfying. Have you got any other questions?
I sort of wanted to, on your Dresden and on this lovely quilt, you fussy cut so many of the pieces. Sorry, let's get this one out.
There we go.
This is absolutely beautiful, where you're making those, how you've cut them has made them into a completely different pattern. How is it you go about doing that?
So the technique isn't a new one, there are really historical, really old quilts from Victorian times, and I think they've got what we would call fussy cutting, because they've cut the fabrics so the lines are all going in one direction. And obviously in Victorian times it was very much an upper class technique to do, because it was people that had access to a large amount of fabric, they could be choosy with the fabric, because you know it is a case of being choosy in how you want. You're not cutting ad hoc, you're cutting in a very specific way. When I first learnt paper piecing, it was at Fest for the Quilts in, I don't know, 2015 I think it was, and I did a workshop on paper piecing and on fussy cutting. And I remember I'd seen all these pictures on Instagram of people that had pattern match, which is when you recreate the motif across the shapes. You might have 6 hexagons and you're recreating that motif across all 6 hexagons. And I thought, oh, I want to do that. I really want to do it. And it was a dog, and the dog ended up with 3 ears and a nose that was on its chin. It was
A Picasso dog.
Yeah, it went so horribly wrong.
You have to be quite precise with it, don't you? And it's known by several different terms as well.
And so I wanted to learn more about it, and so I started an Instagram sewing group called the Sew Along, and we called ourselves the Fussy Cutting Sew Along, because I thought, you know, that's just what it's called. And in 2019, somebody on the Sew Along had said, the word fussy always has a negative connotation for me. And it really got me thinking, and I thought, actually, she's right. We talk about toddlers being fussy eaters, and when we talk about well-being and self-care, it just didn't sit comfortably with me to continue using the words fussy cutting, because we're not being fussy, we're being, you know, specific, or we're being focused, or we're shining the spotlight on it. So we changed the name of our sewing group to the Focus Cutting Sew Along, because I like to think that I'm not being fussy, I'm being focused in cutting my fabric in such a specific way that I want it to highlight something or shine a spotlight on something. So it's about the language.
I like the language, the spotlights, the focus, it gives
elevating your sewing, giving it the credit that it deserves.
That's so interesting to hear that language can evolve within a craft.
To these, I mean, I certainly did as a child, had a kaleidoscope as well. And when you look at these, it's very similar to the old kaleidoscope patterns we used to get.
That's what I thought about the Dresdens. You know, when you would turn it, and each turn would give you another
click, slightly different colour.
And it's only 2 fabrics that I use to do the Dresdens, and each one is a different way of doing it. You know, fabric has got so much potential, but you know, it doesn't necessarily have to be wasteful, because yes, I used a lot of specific pieces for that, but all the leftover pieces I can then do a strip piece quilt, like another Quilt-as-you-go, and do an ad hoc thing and start to play with colour.
So there's no waste. You like that, wouldn't you?
I don't want any waste. So if I'm doing a fussy cut quilt, I will have the one that I really want to do it, and then I do a secondary quilt with the bits that are left over. I don't want to have any leftover pieces. I want it all used.
Fantastic. Naomi, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been absolutely fascinating. Thank you very much to our experts as well. And thank you very much for joining us. It's been wonderful to have your company here in the Makers Studio, and we'll see you again soon. Thank you.